Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher! And we're going to have some fun today. We're going to talk about the Legion hype of potential professions. They have been mentioned, haven't they? They said they're going to add quests, they're going to do stuff with it, because let's face it, WoD just fucked professions so hard. Let's give everybody access to professions. Oh, you had mining and herbalism? You've no need to go mine and herbalist. Farm man and herbalist. Because now it's in your garrison. And everybody can do it. You don't even need to have mining and herbalism. No worries. Okay, well, why? Why do that? And then we're going to gate off the results of your hard labour, so you can only do a certain amount of day. But don't worry, we've got work orders and we've got things that'll come later in the expansion because we realised this was a really shitty idea, so you can now rush order them and all this kind of good stuff. And yeah, so what went wrong? No argument from me. That was a thing. And I think there's very little chance, if we're being honest, of anything major coming in Legion. What's likely to happen is kind of pushing it back to where it was at a MOP kind of standard, and then throwing in a little bit of extra interaction along the way. So, with that being said, that would be a rather boring conversation. But it's not to say we can't start planting some ideas anyway for the future. Because in my opinion, and agree with me or not, I think professions could be as big a part of the game as doing PvP or doing PvE. They really, really can. Professions are an open door to do lots of very, very cool stuff because it's user-generated. And user-generated stuff is the real key to the golden factory, right? This is the golden egg that a lot of MMO creators are starting to look towards getting. And Star Citizen is a good example of that, where they're looking to make a hell of a lot of user-generated stuff. Instead of being reliant on the company to create these things and try and suit them to balance needs and all that kind of stuff, the real trick is to create a system where the users can be interactive with that and allow people to go forth and prosper in that environment. We can look at the success of things like Mario Maker. It doesn't matter if people are good at it, but what we're seeing is every day, thousands upon thousands of things are being created, and that game will last essentially forever because people are going out and creating stuff for it just for fun. And they don't expect anything from it. And this is the great, great key to MMOs, because this content doesn't get consumed. Once it's consumed and it's done with, you complete your reputation and you're done with it. All that kind of stuff. You kill the last boss and you're done with it. But when it's user created and it has an everlasting longevity, then people keep coming back for more and more and more. So with that being said, how can this relate to professions going forward? What can we maybe expect to see in Legion? And how can we look to make it better even beyond Legion? Maybe. I think what we certainly need to do is, first of all, address the biggest problem with WoW's professions as they currently stand, which is that everything below the cap is absolutely useless, and therefore reaching the cap is usually extremely easy. We'd usually do it. Let's be fair. Most of us who play the game on a reasonably intense level will complete our professions, at least within the first week of a new expansion. We'll get it done, call it a day, and be happy campers. And then we're ready and raring for anything that should happen to cross our paths. And what that has never been more the case than ever is like we'll just naturally pick up the stuff because we're already capped and we're waiting to do that. Everything below cap generally is pretty poor, which hasn't always been the case. Even if we go back as far as vanilla, we can certainly see that engineering picked up very, very cool stuff along the way. It didn't need to be capped to access it. And then we can move on to things like Wrath of the Lich King, where getting various different types of item enchantments from the cheaper ones and the spell threads, all that kind of stuff came earlier than when we capped, as did the bonuses, which have sadly been removed from professions. They came earlier in the profession's life cycle, meaning you didn't have to be capped. So where am I going with this? What I would really love to see is then move to a model where people can invest a hell of a lot of time and reap the benefits of that. A wonderful thing to see in any MMO is a bustling marketplace environment. So right now we have the auction house, which is generally very busy, and that's quite cool, but we'd always like to see something that adds to that. Now, for fear of being rose-tinted, as many people like to do that, there's a lot of things that have killed that potential. Such things as item scrolls, being able to create gems and just have them in your bags. All that kind of stuff has really defeated the idea of ever creating a marketplace, and certainly killed the ideas of the people who love to be a professional or add something to the game or be a part of the game community, which is what most people want out of an MMO. Not everybody wants to be a raider. Not everybody wants to be a top PvP star. A lot of people just want to play with their friends and be a part of the community in their own way, whether or not that's going to be a top battle pet player or anything along those lines. And professions are easily an option to access that mentality. I don't want to be a top raider. I don't want to dedicate that time, but I'll quite happily sit in trade chat and be a master craftsman, of which these raiders and the PvPers and everybody below would like to come to me to see. Now, with our current system, we don't ever need to do that particularly. We don't need to go out and ask people to craft things for us, because it's crafted, it's usually BOE, it can be stuck on the auction house, and that's the end of it, which for me is a very sterile way of playing. It's not very social, it doesn't add to the environment. Trade skillers, if we can call them that, or professionals, don't need to intermix as much as they used to in the past. Right, and that's to me, I think, is quite sad. So I mentioned there the idea of master craftsman. I think a model we could certainly look to move to, or I think would be very, very enjoyable, is to abuse the fact that Blizzard has introduced these tertiary stats and all these kind of stuff. And what I would really like to see is, rather than static items, such as the chest, you know, your chest, your legs, your potion, your flask, is that master craftsman, via various methods of unlocking it and progressing to becoming up towards a master craftsman, of which there would be several levels. So let's say we kept the capped system. Let me put the general idea in front of you, is that you could reach the top of the skill points tree, although I would like to see that actually removed, as everything below that, and that is getting absurdly high, is useless. So we have to craft a lot of nonsense things, is actually being able to create good stuff early on. Yeah, they were able to create good stuff early on, but it's of a weaker quality. Now, what do I mean by weaker quality? I would introduce things like randomization to what the actual effect of that item is. So let's say, let me give an easy example here. So an amateur craftsman, which everybody can attain relatively easily, just as we do today. An amateur craftsman could create a chest, and the bonus stats on it, such as your crit and your multi-strike or your haste, are randomly generated. Something which we actually see today, right? We see that in Walls of Draenor. You craft a piece of armor, and what you get is 2 random stats. So to counter that, Blizzard actually introduced the ability to re-roll stats. I would then remove that. What I would then do is create methods via questing and going out and resourcing, and kind of look towards, for an idea of what I'm getting at here, is the ability that the fishing way of doing things, which was a vanilla idea, where we had to go and visit Master Nat Pagal and go on his quest chain to go and visit various areas, fish various things, and kind of prove ourselves and train and come up with these ideas. And then you could upgrade your level of craftsman. Now, I certainly don't think this is anything that should be easy to attain, and should take a lot of investment into the game in order to do that, along with being able to craft a certain amount of items. What does this allow you to do? You could then become like a superior craftsman. At a superior level, you can choose. The craftsman can then decide one of the stats to be generated, right? That's a guarantee. And then you can have this extra idea mixed in where the second of the, because we usually get 2 stats, don't we? Usually get crit and haste or something along those lines. The second one is still random, but now they can start to choose that. Or they can tell you, if you bring me certain materials, that will definitely result in critical strike being on it, but we don't know what the other one will be. The process then continues further to the obvious next level, which is sort of a professional, where they can choose the 2 stats. However, we can then go into the Master Craftsman's level, where they can actually start adding tertiary stats. And this system can go on and on and on, with the ability to either randomly generate those stats, resulting in either a really good piece of armor if you're lucky, or something worth selling. Or, once you get to the actual master level, you can actually start to choose what definitely will be coming out of there, which then rewards more gold, because your people who are coming to you, which will be these PvPers and the PvEers, will be coming to you saying, I want this particular crafted item, and these are the materials to generate it, and you as a master craftsman can definitely generate this item. Or if they're lacking gold, or you're getting stuff for leveling, you can go and get a random set of stats off a cheaper smith, right? Do you get the idea that I'm going for here? So, previous to being a master craftsman, your results can be random. And as you progress further down the line, you can be very specific about what you can do. Along the way, you'll certainly be unlocking various different armors and along those kind of things, right? You'll be locking various different recipes. I've always liked the discovery system. It just rewards you from doing your profession, which means that we'll be crafting, in my world, you will be crafting less items generally, but discovering more things along the way, which then encourages this longevity into the process. It also allows these user-generated interactions to occur. I would certainly like to look at things like enchanting, and I would like to take a moment to look at enchanting and alchemy. So enchanting has become very wayward, and I think one of the big solutions to enchanting is that enchants themselves are kind of okay, right? They've been relegated to being kind of mundane at this point. They grant an X amount of a stat, all that kind of stuff, and that's all right. I mean, people expect to be able to enchant the weapons. It's not overly interesting. I would certainly enjoy to see that these random enchantments can be decided in some way. Again, with this user idea. So if you want to get haste, I mean, you just generally look. This is the problem I have right now. Not saying it's a bad way, but it's boring, in my opinion. Is you look at what your best stat is, and then you slap that on the weapon, and that's it. And that's why we have these scrolls just sat in our bag. I will have a stack of mastery enchants, or whatever it might be, just to whack on as soon as I get an item, and I don't think anything of it. It's just a mandatory process that goes in. It's not fun, it's not that interesting. Where do I have fun with enchanting, though? Let me think. Oh, was it something that you tacked on at the end, which actually turned out to be way more interesting? Which was the effect, the visual effect of what the enchant does. Now that's the interesting part of enchanting for me, and probably for many others as well. Deciding the actual visual effect that will go on your weapons is way more interesting than actually physically spending all the gold or all the time and materials in generating the actual enchant that increases your DPS or your healing or whatever, right? The actual fun part is spending like fucking 6 dust or 12 dust or whatever it is on choosing what it's going to look like and swapping between them and seeing, oh, well, that looks cool. Maybe I can mix that with my armor. Maybe that's going to look really good. Let's take that out of being such an arbitrary part of the system and add that onto the master craftsmen. The master enchanters can actually come up with all different major kinds of visual effects and choose them on there. And then there's less access the further down the line you are. But these master enchanters, they can come up with, and they'll say, oh, you want glowing fire? Yeah, I have that. Oh, you want glowing purple void tendrils? Yeah, I can have that. And you can go and do that. And they can preview it for you. Love to include a preview system in enchants, especially when we're talking visuals. And do all this kind of stuff, which would make it way more interesting in deciding how your character is. And then it generates repeat business, and so on and so forth. And it's just a never-ending cycle of quite cool stuff that isn't just as mundane as whacking on an extra chunk of strength or whatever it might be onto your item and going, very cool. That's kind of nice. When Mongoose was launched, if we look back to Mongoose and Executioner, it wasn't really the effect that was cool, although people were happy with it. It was the fact that it had the green lightning. That's what's enchanting and exciting about weapon enchants, right? That's what's exciting. And can we then add this onto shoulders? Can I create a glow on my shoulders? Maybe I can go and see an inscriber for that. Or if we're going to leave it at enchanters who do this kind of stuff, can I do stuff to my shoulders or to my helm? Can I maybe do something like this? Can I not just play around with my character endlessly and see what I can generate? And this is all then stuff that is progressively unlocked by going down the enchanting path, which is beyond just capping your points and all that kind of good stuff. Alchemy. Alchemy has some opportunity to be really interesting, but unfortunately, a lot of the interesting ideas they throw in haven't worked out, like the potions of treasure hunting, and what essentially it boils down to is the creation of flasks and the creation of potions. Now, it's a bit more difficult to come up with ingenious ways of making alchemy amazing, although I'm sure some of you could maybe do that, but I would certainly like to see potions that do various different things. I would even love even something simple, such as an agility potion that has various durations. Now, hear me out here. If we need to kill a... Let's look at something like Blast Furnace, right? We have a 10-second window where this definitely needs to die. And this has happened on many fights. So we've got like Deathwing's back. We've got emergency points where we're going to go through a frenzy mode. This happens on a pretty regular basis. And I actually don't want to have the effect of my potion for 30 seconds, right? I don't really want that. It's not actually that useful to me. I would rather be more powerful for a shorter period of time, even if it slightly outweighs it. Now, of course, this would need to balance out, and of course, with the current potion restrictions per fight, that shouldn't be too big of a deal to do. But being able to alternate and look at alchemists and maybe look towards guys who are doing that and creating those things, that creates all kinds of interesting possibilities for what potions can do. Similarly with flasks, do we have to have it as a flat buff, or can I change it to a proc if I want to? I talked about various different ideas for flasks and food buffs, because right now they're incredibly static. We have items in the game that give us permanent flasking, and so we don't really see the extra power potential of being flasked at any point in the game. Unless you're dying every 15 minutes for whatever reason, being unflasked is a rarity. Which is crazy compared to the idea that flasks should be this super powerful buff that you add to yourself because you're going ham, right? You're going balls to the wall, you got a dippy dick in there, cover it in mayonnaise and start shoving it in the sandwich. That's the game. That's what flasking is all about. Not just like we're about to start trash, can everybody flask up and get ready to go? And of course we do, because they cost pennies, silver. They cost a few gold to get some flasks, and they've never been easier to get, making them very uninteresting. If we can change how they worked so that they could be interesting. If I want a flat buff because we're doing something like the Butcher, where I just need consistently high DPS, sure, let's go that way. Or can I pick one that has maybe no flat buff, but it will give me a proc? Oh, that's interesting. It'll give me a proc over the course of the next couple of hours, which I can then, as a better player, maybe use to my advantage. Or if I'm a bit weaker, or maybe my class just isn't proc-based, or I don't have proc trinkets to line it up with, I can go with the flat buff. Can I then go and see a Master Alchemist and get a potion that's going to last me 10 seconds, or 20 seconds, or 30 seconds? Can I tailor that around my character so I can mix and match these things? I'm not saying these are the best ideas ever, but they're what I've came up with over the last couple of days. There's another subject I'd like to touch on, which is engineering. Engineering. So, for those of you wondering about me going into specifics, dual crafting would be very similar to the crafting and the alchemy, where there's choices in what your gems actually do that aren't just flat buffs. Okay, so a similar sort of idea would be applying there to any of the crafting side of the professions. In terms of mining and herbalism, there's a lot of opportunity there for the class halls to come involved to find specific mining areas, which as a miner you can go in to do that, and you can actually gain more resources and so on and so forth, and rare materials and all that kind of stuff. Good stuff can come from mining and herbalism very, very easily. What we can look at with engineering, which has always been the unique one, is taking a leaf out of their book to keep more fun stuff in the game. Now, I'm going to throw this out as the last point, but I think it's something worth considering before people get really sort of uptight about this. I'm just saying keep an open mind. Professions have the possibility to take away some of part of the game which has actually become really mundane in my eyes, and that is raid cooldowns. Right? Now, Bloodlust, I agree, should remain under the control of a player, and being able to be, I think the Shaman and the Hunter to a lesser extent, and the Mage work well with the current Bloodlust. I'm talking about the defensive ones. I think there's a good opportunity to use professions like Alchemy and Engineering, and those kind of on-the-spot generators that aren't big-time things, to actually give more opportunity to raid cooldowns. So, Power Word Barrier would remain in the game, but you would also have the option of, if you didn't have a Disc Priest for whatever reason, or Disc Priest wasn't very popular, or if it moved away, is that an engineer could actually throw down something like a Ghostbusters Trap, which is essentially just a Power Word Barrier, but you can also add these to the profession side of things so that raid cooldowns aren't a big of an issue. This is going slightly into gameplay, but it does bother me at the moment that several raid cooldowns, such as Tranquility and Revival, are also good sources of mana regen. Right, they actually benefit from being very, very low cost for very, very high power. And Divine Hymn works in a similar fashion, where it's actually a mana loss not to be using that thing. That bothers me, considering how powerful that spell is. If you look at the distinction we've made from Lay on Hands, which used to drain all your mana down to 10%, I believe, or restore 10%, or give you ended up with about 10%, I believe, if you use Lay on Hands. Because it was so insanely powerful, of course, it drained all your resources. Really gave your character that last-ditch feel, right? This was the last hope, is I can Lay on Hands, essentially sacrifice my usefulness to give you the super powerful heal. And then we go to today, where Tranquility is a mana regen ability, although it heals the entire raid for ludicrous amounts, and Revival does the same thing, Divine Hymn less so, as it's not as powerful. But you get my idea, is that super powerful output spells are actually good for business. They're actually good for you as a player to be casting them, rather than, oh shit, we need to use this mega cooldown. Professions could offset that. Even Alchemy could throw down some sort of vial, which then generates something similar to a smoke bomb from a rogue. There's no real reason these things can't exist. And they don't overlap because they would share a cooldown, obviously. But it adds extra weight to your raid setup, so you can start intermingling that instead of saying, right, we need 3 smoke bombs, or we need 2 bubbles for this. Does that mean we need 2 Disc Priests, which doesn't work well together? Well, no. In fact, if we've got an engineer, we've got that covered as well. And I think that could be a very interesting step to take for professions. So there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts on professions. Will we see any of that in Legion? Maybe, but probably not. But it's looking towards the list expansion. It's certainly one of the... I would finish on this, that this is the biggest part of the game I think could really push the game forward, and is underutilized massively right now. It's just a side thought. We're an RPG, we need professions in some way or another, and it's way less interesting than it possibly could be. I'd love to see your thoughts on it. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.